Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Hazen. Coming up today, we got Aaron Smith. He's manager of Showplace Cinemas East, Evansville's biggest theater, and he's always been my go-to to whenever I really want to find out what the average moviegoer really is thinking. He's always the person I go to first. He's the person that actually sees it firsthand. For example, recently during all the stuff when incels were supposedly going to go see the Joker, he was the one who was, checking in with about that. But first up, what did I watch this week? If you want, you could follow me on Letterboxd. It's a great service. I use it as a kind of a diary to follow what I'm watching every week and share with others. My username is Bodamander, Bodamander. But I had a pretty good week. I saw three things. The first thing I saw was interesting, but being honest, not that engaging. It was Exhibition, Joanna Hogg's movie before The Souvenir, her movie that's currently kind of making the top 10 lists. And if you've ever seen a Joanna Hogg movie, they kind of are accumulation of snapshots. They feel very true to life. But by that, they also are very frequently she dramatizes scenes of things where it, from a narrative standpoint, it feels like nothing's happening, and the movies have the effect of accumulating into being more the sum of their parts. And I was fortunate enough to see The Souvenir in a theater. This I watched at home on DVD, and one of the great things I've always argued about the need for the theatrical experience is you cannot press pause like you can with streaming or on DVD. And if you're going to watch a movie that's going to challenge you or have rhythms that challenge you, that have some, time periods where rhythmically either nothing happens or it's uncomfortable to watch it, if you're at home, there's always the option of your phone or to press pause. And so I can't tell you how many times I pressed pause on this movie, which was unfortunate because it was an interesting movie, a study of a couple that might or might not have been disintegrating around. They're both working artists, and they're selling their modernist house, and they both have a workflow in their modernist house. And the other interesting thing about it is it had non-actors in it, but it starred the lead singer of the Slits. And I think Joanna Hogg's idea behind it was to have a partially sexualized woman in her 40s, and so the performance was abruptly sexualized randomly, and it was very interesting. But very interesting. Not, I can't say 100% very engaging, but second movie I saw this week, I'm not going to speak too much of just because it's a wide release that a bunch of everyone else has seen. It's A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. The one thing I will say distinctly about it is there's a sequence in the middle that's a silent scene. I won't spoil it, but I think it's definitely going to go up as one of my scenes of the year. It was a very taking kind of cut to the heart scene, with a little bit of directing juju and I don't want to exactly say magic realism, but it was really fascinating that Mario Heller, I read that she got Tom Hanks onto the movie by convincing him that it was a movie about talking to men and boys about their anger, which, I mean, it's amazing that it took a female filmmaker's sensibilities to get to the heart of something like that, because, I mean, like, the statistics are crazy that, was it men commit 95% of all violent acts or something like that. And so this is really, really taking scene and really, yeah, really beautiful. And I kind of think the movie for me was better than the Morgan Neville documentary. The last thing I saw just today was really great. It's called Atlantics. It's Mati Diop. She's the only black female filmmaker to be in competition at Cannes. She's a French Senegal filmmaker, and she filmed in her home country, and it is just some really great filmmaking, some really bold, great filmmaking, gives you a great sense of place, great love story, some I've read an interview where she talked about some of the mystical elements and how they're not really mystical for where she's from, but um, you're always going to cut to the heart with me personally whenever you shoot a movie like Michael Mann, like especially the night scenes. It's just someone who leans into the digital photography and the beauty of that and all the colors you get at night and that color palette. It's I really like the movie. Today's guest is Aaron Smith. As I mentioned earlier, he runs Showplace Cinemas East, or is the main manager out there. I've known Aaron Smith a long time, um, and we, to be blunt, to start out this podcast, I wanted to have people I'm comfortable with, just to kind of figure out the rhythm of everything. And Aaron Smith he was really helpful to me during college. He's only a few years older than me, but he always had these wise nuggets. Anyone who knows me or sees me around him at the theater knows I call him Smith, or Aaron Braka-Smithovich. And that story comes from, I was working at North, and I was door, and this guy drove up. It was an empty parking lot, and drove he parked over two spots, and I was so annoyed and just glared at the guy as he bought his ticket, and I tore it and glared at him as he walked by. And in between shows, I went up to Smith and said, or I was like, I was going to do something about it. And so on the back of our cleaning sheet, I wrote a short story, very short story, about the inventor of the parking spot, Aaron Braka-Smithovich. And this would have been around the time Aaron Brockovich had come out, and I think there was a nickname around it with him already established. But I wrote about the inventor of the parking spot, who was a Polish immigrant who hand painted individual pieces of gravel, and placed them at the Polo Grounds for the 1912 World Series, and was shocked whenever the early cars just threw the gravel asunder. And then I left the lesson. It's like gravel. The lesson of a parking spot only works if it's one car per one spot. So I handed it to Smith, and it's like, I'm going to leave this on this guy's car. And Smith, having to deal with these precocious, scoddling little kids who have these jobs as hobbies at best sometimes, to deal with it, said one of his great nuggets: if you feel this strongly about it, you'd keep that car. And sure enough, he wouldn't let me put the short story on there, and nothing ever happened with the guy. But Aaron Smith is easily one of my favorite people on the planet. Back when I worked in college, we'd get off. I'd project and he'd manage, and you get off around 11:30 sometimes. And so many nights I wouldn't leave till like 4 or 5 in the morning. We just shooting the shit the entire time. And he's told so many stories, and yet as I get to the end of this podcast, and he's told a story I've never heard before, and it's kind of amazing. So check out, get through the end at the very least to check this out. I should apologize in advance also for the audio quality. Someone who works in the post end of things should know stuff a little better. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong yet, which I guess is the problem. But hopefully the audio quality will be getting better gradually as the episodes go on. You and I have known each other almost about 20 years now. I mean, it's slightly over 20 years.
At least, right? How old are you? 40?
Not yet. No. I always have to think about how old I am. I'm 38.
So 12? No. So I'm assuming we met when you were 16, right?
No. The way I track it is Titanic came out in 97.
Not by terms of you being a sophomore or junior.
I can't
when
remember.
Titanic came out.
Well, no, Titanic.
Was that formative? Was that a moment in time?
It was. But anyway, no, I remember because it came out on Christmas or whenever around December, and I got hired in January.
That's odd because I have a kind of a similar time frame. I know that I was a sophomore. It was the summer after my sophomore year in high school that I started at the theater. But that, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was playing in the big screen.
You've always told me Last Crusade was playing because I remember distinctly one of my we never were allowed to go to or we just didn't go to the movies, not allowed, but my parents never took us, and I remember we went to see Batman on my mom's birthday, and that would have been like 2 or 3 weeks after you started at Showplace North too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that was a banner year for the cinema because Titanic, Batman, and then oddly enough, Honey I Shrunk the Kids was huge. Sold out show after show after show that, and so
was the video store still there? And when you got there,
I think so. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you started out in '89 at Showplace Cinemas North.
Yep.
Okay. So rewinding back, you're from Poseyville.
No, no. I was born in St. Mary's. We always had an Evansville mailing address, but it's on the far west side.
Okay.
So I went to North Posey, which is in Posey County, but I think if I were maybe 3 blocks the other direction, I would have went to Wrights. So it's mostly an Evansville address.
Okay. So, but Showplace North was where you saw movies?
Not necessarily, no. Most of the time, sure, but there was Twin Cinema on Diamond Avenue.
I don't know. I don't remember.
I saw Ghostbusters there and a lot of big hits in the 80s.
It's funny.
I saw Star Wars and a lot of the. You know, my parents liked the drive-in, so the Evansville Drive-In, which is where the theater that I work at now is located, was right there at the corner of Burkhart and Green River.
Did you guys drive out there for that?
Absolutely, because my grandparents lived on Burkhart.
Okay.
So I saw Blazing Saddles there, Star Wars Jaws, the Black Hole, a lot of things.
With the speaker in the car.
Speaker on the way, yeah, and we would bring like fried chicken. It was an interesting. It's not the best way to see a movie, obviously.
It's a way to see a movie.
It is.
Rio. I haven't been there in forever, but I remember. I think I saw Twister there, and I remember de facto that was the first time I saw any part of The Shining. But, so how often would you go to the movies then as a kid?
Pretty often. I mean, it wasn't an every week thing because, when you're a kid, you have other responsibilities as well. I mean, you had Little League and everything else that takes time when you're a child. So I know we went a lot, just not,
Was it a whole family thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I have a little sister too, so, sometimes we'd see things like, and I guess maybe it was a re-release of The Omen, but I remember watching The Omen with my parents.
That's 76, right?
Yeah. No, I think that might have been, well, I'm not sure.
When it first came out, I'm pretty sure it's 76.
But, and she had to have been like 6 or 7, maybe. And of course, it's a
Do you remember where
small child. It was at the drive-in.
It was at the drive-in? Yeah. Okay. So wait, that was what do you think your first movie was?
No. I honestly don't remember. It would have had to have been something around one of the first movies I remember, honestly, and it's very cliched, was Star Wars. Because I was born in '72, so in '77 I was 5, and that's when you really start creating memories that you'll retain. So,
yeah, sure.
I'm sure I saw something before then, Disney, some stuff like that kids see. I just don't remember.
Okay. When did you when did your family get a VCR, or when did you start watching movies at home?
Let's see. It was pretty early. I remember a lot of my friends didn't have a VCR, and we had one of those set-top boxes that was probably the size of a small cooler. It was enormous, and it had that flap-up hinge that you put the tape in, and it was.
My grandma was a Beta. It was sided on the wrong side, and they had that lift up thing. It felt like the DeLorean of VCRs.
At the time, you didn't recognize how crazy and how just enormous this thing is until you see a later model or your friends get one that's normal size, but I remember it was ridiculously expensive. I think it was $1,400 or something, and that was in late '70s, early '80s money. So just imagine what that would be like now. But it's as with everything. When you're an early adapter, you spend a lot more. But I guess it was important to my parents. I don't know.
What
because then we weren't wealthy at all.
But
so
it was important
to spend that kind of money on a VCR at the time.
What were
It was an investment.
the movies you watched or on it earlier?
Well, interestingly, I basically just worked my way from one wall to the next at the video store.
Really? Like,
Yeah, so at the summertime, my parents would take me to the video store, sometimes there at the North Park Cinema, and just, I'd pick out a movie, take one back, pick a new one. And, there were limited choices. They probably only had 6, 7, 800 titles. So I just watched everything.
what were the movies
Well,
you remember specifically, or that stood out?
Oh, yeah, lots of things. Of course, it's the first time you see something like The Godfather. And of course, that changed your life. How you look at film. But I also remember, and I think about this now because, I see my children, and my son is going through this period now where, he's afraid of things because he's getting into, you know, you first consider your own mortality and, your parents' mortality.
How old's your...
He's 8.
Okay.
But he's also very smart. So, I was thinking about some of the movies that really scared me and made, a real impression on me at that age. And, obviously The Omen, I thought
Yeah.
that was an incredible film. And I think it still holds up to some extent. It's not really bloody or anything, but just conceptually. And of course, Rosemary's Baby. Those were movies that you see when you're probably too young to see those type of movies, but also that were very memorable.
Well,
the experience is something I remember. Not just the film, but I remember what I was doing.
What were you
how
doing?
I felt. Well, sitting in a room watching this 1,400-pound VCR. But, it's weird because when I think about, these are my favorite movies, I always come back to like Apocalypse Now and, highbrow films.
Okay.
But it's honestly things like, and I guess maybe you could, depending upon your perspective, you could put The Exorcist or The Omen in that category. But I don't normally. But, when I think about it now, those are the films that really made me stay up at night. Like, they would haunt me for days, sometimes weeks, and maybe still do.
Were you a horror kid?
No, that's the thing. Not really. And I'm still not. Honestly, I think that's that's kind of a sore spot in sometimes when I have conversations with our mutual friend Ted.
Yeah.
Because I think he and I both, we're not averse to horror films, but I think we like the unicorn horror films. The films that are unique and not just, traditional. So, like, films that are a good concept, but not necessarily a good film, that spawn franchises like Saw. Or even The Purge, which I think is actually a good concept. It could have been great, like the Romero zombie films. Like, there's an angle they could have used for those films that they chose not to, and so they just made a more traditional and honestly, a lower quality film than it could have been. And those type of movies I just generally don't like. I've only seen the first Saw movie. I'm not gonna watch it anymore.
Yeah.
I only watched the first Purge.
Well, it's funny because you and our mutual friend are very I don't know if it's like people are coming at you a lot with horror movies that they expect you to like, or like you guys have always bring this up. And like, wasn't animated movies also on your blind spot list?
Definitely for him, that is. No, I love animated films. I think I tell him a lot of times, and it's odd to talk about him in third person. I feel like it would be an interesting experiment to have a conversation with the three of us, because that way he could defend himself. But I think
we could play that. We could play that out down the line. Yeah.
He definitely gets upset when I bring up the fact that he doesn't go out of his way to see the best animated films. He likes the Ghibli films and most Pixar films, but I don't know if he really watches them or enjoys them. I think that just because you almost have to enjoy those films.
Yeah.
Well, especially if you're a film fan.
Well, also if you've got kids too.
Well, he doesn't, obviously.
No, I'm saying specifically for you.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Your kids don't want to watch Inside Out 5 times. They'll go through it, they enjoy it, but that's not one that bears repeat viewings for kids.
But Frozen or something.
So I saw Frozen 700 times. I saw Moana a million times. Recently, my daughter loved Greatest Showman, so I saw that a million times. But when they were really small, it was always just garbage, and not like Sesame Street where it's interesting and educational to an extent. Just literal garbage like Care Bears.
So going back, first off, was a whole family thing, you guys, or was there anybody in the family in particular that liked movies more than the rest of the family, or
I don't know. I would assume me, honestly.
when did that start to emerge?
Probably as soon as I started seeing films, and of course the memories that I've retained have been the times at the drive-in. Of course, I do remember, but Ghostbusters, that's early '80s, so I was obviously old enough to remember those things. So seeing a movie in a cinema, the memories that I've retained are much later than the drive-in movies, and I think part of the reason that they're memorable because yes, those films are great, they hold up, they're all-time classics, sure, but that you do go with your family, and I remember having the bride sneaking in. I don't think you're supposed to. I guess maybe the drive-in, it's encouraged.
You've mentioned this before too, the fried chicken at the drive-in.
Of course, and I think most people like if your formative experiences, if you went with an older uncle or something, and you snuck in candy or whatever, you would
something
remember
devious.
You remember those things, so it does add to your enjoyment of the film or just the movie-going experience.
What were the first movies you saw without your family then? When did you start going?
By myself, probably it will be not until I was in my late teens, because even after I got the job there, you wind up going with friends.
Well, I mean, also with friends too, just
seeing
without
movies that they would want to see rather than movies that I would want to see.
Oh.
Also, it is a mainstream cinema, so it isn't as if it wasn't until I was probably in college when I was working at a different theater that they were showing more art films.
You mean South? Or?
This was absolutely, and that's in the early '90s with that new wave of American cinema, with Tarantino, Kevin Smith, and so I remember seeing Do the Right Thing Friday night that had opened, and to me that was
what was that like?
Oh, it was terrific. I loved working there because it seemed like, and this is such a Gen X moment, but like cinema was changing, it was improving, and I don't know if that era gets the credit it deserves to some extent. I mean, I know, like Pulp Fiction certainly is iconic at this point, but that's in like '94. Right. So from probably '92 to '96,
like the Sundance wave, like
the
post Sex Lies thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do the Right Thing, was that a wide release? So
I'm not even sure. I don't think it was. I think it was. If it was on limited screens, because I remember that it was kind of a big deal when we finally did get it, and it was extraordinarily popular. But me and my girlfriend went on opening night.
Here? Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. That just kind of.
And of course, if you've seen the movie, which I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
It has a specific message that you can interpret a couple different ways, or even endless ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even Spike Lee doesn't necessarily like to get tied down on it, because I know that he always gets upset when they ask him a question, did Mookie do the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
So when the movie's over, I don't know how I feel about it, but I do know how my girlfriend feels about it, because she's afraid, because literally we're the only two white people in the theater. But I didn't feel afraid. I felt like we'd all had an experience that everyone would remember. Like everyone in that room, I thought, you're going to remember going to see this movie. You're going to remember where you were and how you felt.
I don't remember if it's a legend that got told or it just kind of got blended into the movie adaptations, but supposedly Barack and Michelle Obama, one of their first dates was Do the Right Thing. I know the movie...
That's interesting.
South Side with You, they ended up going to see that.
He has to be older. I mean, he has to be older than me, right?
Yeah.
You'd think. I mean, maybe not.
Well, he was in like either grad school or his after grad school, but yeah. So wait, rewinding back a bit, do you remember the first date you went on into a movie and what you saw?
No. Do you?
Well, you know me as much as a dater as wide dater as I am. Like it wasn't a common thing to so. I remember going to I remember one specific one that that was very memorable early on, but not like you're smiling like
Good experience or a bad experience?
no, it was a mixed experience because I didn't ask the girl out, but it was Titanic, and it was funny because I should have asked the girl out and I didn't, but I sat with her, and because it's Titanic, I bawled like a baby next to her.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure.
Yeah, and then
That's
and then a
awesome.
few days later, I was one of your employees, or a
That's
few weeks
great.
later. Yeah.
Yeah, I cried too. I loved when that was at its peak, and you were selling out show after show, and it was in that 550 screen theater.
Yeah.
And
Old
when
number 9 in North.
Jack just descends in the depths and falls on the door, you could just feel these 550 people all having this similar experience at the exact same moment. And so it was nice to go in there just because I had seen the movie at that time
Yeah.
several times, and I had seen that moment probably hundreds of times. I mean, it was a really popular film, but I would go in there at that moment just so I could experience it with that new group of people.
That is the thing I miss most about
And
the
you had to have been 16, right? Crying,
yeah.
bawling your eyes
The
out.
I mean, there was a ton of moments I used to. It's always, when you worked at a movie theater, you found amazing moments in mediocre movies a lot, but you also were there whenever the really big moment. The one I remember right before I left East was after. Gandalf the Grey dies in Fellowship of the Ring. I just remember you'd always feel an audience dip at that point. You know, it's the same exact thing. You go in there so you'd see someone, you'd feel the room, feel it. It was yeah. I miss that most about theater. That's, I mean, have you gauged over the years like how the consistency of those moments where an audience works and whether they've dipped or ebbed and flowed or
It's really rare, honestly. I mean, I'm sure there are certain films, sports films, that build to that moment that, creates I'm going to say, think of The Natural, when he hits the home run and knocks out the light tower. That probably affects people, particularly big groups of people, because honestly, if there's only 12 people in there, even if everybody has a giant erection at the same time, you're not going to notice because it's not a communal experience at that level where you would be able to palpably feel that in the theater. But so something like Titanic, that was rare, and the fact that that experience was something that I wanted to share almost as often as I could, just because it's a rare thing, and it's not like even seeing a concert. I'm sure you and I have been to a concert in the last couple of years where you wept at something when something happened that or even something you were expecting. Like Willie Nelson sings, Angel Flying Too Close to the Ground. You still chokes you up even though you've seen Willie Nelson 8 times. I've seen Willie Nelson 8 times. So I knew he was going to do it. And still, it just feels, it's emotional. And, those moments are rare in a cinema. Individually, I have those moments where
yeah.
it will affect me individually. But to have a group of people experiencing that at the same time, that's pretty rare.
Okay, so you started Showplace North, and how long was it before you started? And you went out to South to manage,
Yeah, that was probably, right around 90, 91.
and South was it was still a full price, but it was the art house second run theater kind of.
Yeah, I always said it was the art/ghetto theater. So they would choose to put anything that they wouldn't want to play at the main, and I mean, you make whatever determination you like. I don't think there was anything, reasoning behind it. It's just that the art house cinema, we had smaller screens, we had older equipment, so they just felt like, if a movie's going to suffer from presentation,
Oh.
we don't care if it's this art film because it's not going to sell as many tickets. And I think that there are probably lots of chains that do that because they feel like the sound system doesn't necessarily matter on an art film because they didn't spend all these millions of dollars for the recording and for mixing. They just
You know, South is where I first saw Godfather.
Really?
because it was a
First
re-release.
saw it ever? Or
Yeah,
first saw
ever.
it on the...
Ever.
Really?
I held out. There's a, I have a thing where
Was that by accident or design?
no, I mean, even early age, I held out for certain movies I wanted to see on the big screen, and there was a Godfather re-release, so I saw that. I held out for Gone with the
So
Wind.
intentionally, you were just thinking at some point, this is going to be back on the big screen. See, when I...
I think it was more like when you get that point in your teens where like when you're starting to get fanatical about film, you start treating something like a checklist that you need to get down, and it just happened that it was playing. So I mean, I was the same with Gone with the Wind. I saw it at East for the first time. Was when I first saw it.
That's great. I
Yeah.
didn't. I never even considered that. For me, obviously I saw Godfather on VHS, and I couldn't wait because there was really no alternative at the time. I didn't think it was ever going to play on a big screen again. And really, unless you live in a bigger city, it's still pretty rare. I mean,
Yeah.
there was that one re-release when you obviously I watched that. It was at South the same year you saw it.
Well, the irony for me is that I wasn't until the second or third time I saw Godfather that I really appreciated because the sound I couldn't. I
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I
like,
saw it on TV Sound, and it still was an incredible movie.
well, there's a certain thing where I know I've had this experience where I show Godfather to another one of our mutual friends, and I like had to remind them who this character was and their relation to other people, and just I vaguely remember having that kind of confusion when I first saw it. Obviously, you did not.
No, not at all. And I didn't. I read the book later, and the
I read
film
the book, too.
is more confusing because of the time structure. But I mean, I didn't feel like it was difficult to follow or that it needed to be. There are certainly famous films that you have a difficult time determining the difference between characters because they have similar character traits or the actors look similarly. But
Well, there's also just a lot of characters in it. But I mean, I also there's a certain. I was this way with Casablanca. I was this way with Citizen Kane, where the hype was too big that
Oh,
I
sure.
kind of had this cockiness about it, and then it was like the second or third time where I was like, all right, I'm starting to really enjoy myself watching this.
I think that's the case with every film. I have bringing back a theme that we had already sort of covered a few minutes ago with Ted and his inability to appreciate horror films or animated films. I have a blind spot, I think, for silent films and certain black and white films.
What kind of
Because,
black and white films?
just when I say black and white films, I realize that there's still black and white films made today. I'm talking about like
You're not gonna go
early-
see The Lighthouse.
no, I can't wait to see The Lighthouse. I'm talking about like early
You put that trailer on
Hollywood
everything.
cinema. Yeah. Oh yeah. I still think that
It's a cool trailer.
I'd like to introduce that to a general audience
Yeah.
just to see something unique because it's become so bland and monotone the things that people show up for.
Well, we
And
should.
I don't want to complain about Marvel movies. I don't want to be
Right.
a Scorsese, although certainly that would be terrific in most aspects. But I don't want to complain about the Marvel movies because I've liked all of them. It would be silly for me to say, "Oh, that isn't cinema," because I don't agree. And I just enjoyed them.
I do want to talk about a technique that you, as a manager, have done. Evansville is probably like I want to say it's like 199 or the 200th biggest market in the country, and you have been known to put art house trailers on as many screens as you can at Showplace East to make sure that people call so that we can maybe get these movies in.
Well, I mean, you can only introduce something. People decide whether or not they want to see it after that. But yeah, I like to do that because I don't think there's a ton of value when you have an audience show up to see, a general cinema mainstream film, the latest Dwayne Johnson, and I'm not picking on him.
Sure.
I think he's great. But, the audience will come out for a Fast and the Furious movie. And if I can introduce something to them that they might not otherwise be interested in seeing, but that might play. Because, I don't want to get in the weeds where, I'm putting odd trailers on that I just know will never play Evansville. But if I know that there's going to be something that might be a breakout hit, an indie hit, and I can potentially do that, I like to do that.
Is Jojo Rabbit doing well right now?
It actually started off really strong. We sold out a few shows opening weekend, but honestly, this week, because there's a premiere of Knives Out Friday and Saturday, JoJo's going to play on the big screen. So if you haven't seen it, this would be the week to see it because the last few weeks it's been in one of the smaller screens. Just so the presentation is fine, the sound is fine, but to see it on that bigger screen, one of the big houses, that'd be the week to do it. So,
Okay. Knives Out's opening early?
yeah, we have two premiere shows Friday and Saturday.
Huh. It's a special. Okay.
So I don't know. I think they just want to get the couple extra shows in to add to their grosses for the Thanksgiving weekend. I don't know.
Okay.
You know how the studios are.
I do, and I don't know how this. One of the other reasons I wanted to have you on here is I feel like you have a perspective that gets lost in the media capitals, where you see what the Midwest movie taste is like on a week to week basis. Like you are the boots on the ground, where in the proof in you're the one that's like, yeah, Downton Abbey's really doing well for a certain set of people, and it's still filling up the theaters.
Yeah, I if you could somehow just factor in what brings an audience out, and then book things depending upon that or taking that into consideration, I think it'd be really easy. But the problem is, certain audiences, they'll come out for a Christian-based film, God's Not Dead, but then they won't come out for God's Not Dead 2. So
Do you have any reasoning or logic why?
I think that certain audiences, especially, and those type of films, those audiences, they're not terribly discerning. They don't necessarily come out because the film is good. They come out because I think that it kind of underscores their own beliefs, and so they'll come out and they want to provide support for that type of thing or for that idea, but not necessarily. And there are other audiences that do that as well, that just show up. Teen audiences for the horror films. They don't care if the film is any good. They just want the studios to continue to crank out these poorly produced, low budget horror films that are made for a teen audience. And then sometimes I think the faith based audience is similar. Not that there haven't been few good faith based films. That audience doesn't necessarily decide, hey, we're coming out for this because it's good, or the reviews are good, or because it's equality is not important.
Were you the one I've had this conversation with about that when it came to faith-based stuff, it was always positive messages that brought people out, but it's not necessarily just because someone's making a religious movie. Like if you, this is a bad example, if you were show a Bresson movie or something like that that's highly religious, they'd be kind of not really against seeing that. I guess it wasn't you I had this conversation with.
No, we've probably had similar conversations many times. I don't fault that audience for their choices. Obviously, audiences come back for whatever they choose, and it's their decision. Sometimes, honestly, this is the case with mainstream films as well. Quality isn't necessarily the reason, and I know for mainstream films it's mostly marketing. If they see enough marketing, they'll come out for a terrible movie. That's the reason there was a Ghost Rider 2. The first Ghost Rider sold a lot of tickets. Everyone hated it. Everyone left the theater saying, "Oh, this is terrible." But because the grosses were so good for those first few opening weeks,
and they got the Crank people to do the sequel too.
Yeah, it's just so the mainstream audience gets tricked into seeing poor films because of marketing, and I don't know what the faith-based audiences, why they come out, like if that's something they heard from in church or a magazine they read. I don't know, but that's a different audience, and it's unique in some ways, and you can't account for that. But I also think, other than Disney now, who they have their marketing down pat, they can sell almost anything.
They have the market pat, by the
yeah,
point.
sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know who else does that as well as they do, where they market a film to the point where it's successful regardless of quality. Not that they don't put out good films, because often they do.
I got a broad question for you that you may need to take a second to think about. But do you think right now, when you look at these audiences and the movies that are being cranked out by mainstream studios, do you think people are enjoying movies right now? The audiences you see at Showplace
You
East
mean
specifically.
me?
No, audiences. Like the masses of people are coming there, and I mean not like one person liked a movie. I mean like generally.
That's a good question, and that'd be hard to say. I don't know. I think I still do, and I hope you still do.
Yeah, no, I do, but I always try to figure out who's got a best eye view on how effective Hollywood is right now, especially because you see the numbers like YouTube and video games are starting to surpass movies as entertainment people go to, at least their money it's making. So, and friends of ours who are watching peak TV right now, and versus people that don't watch peak TV or don't understand that, like for a sophistication level, TV is doing much better than movies are right now. So I mean, that's
Well,
I'm asking the
I
general
think a couple of
reaction.
different ways that I'd like to come at that, and the first one is, yeah, audiences still enjoy the film going experience. They still enjoy movies, but it's almost as if it's only specific types of films, and obviously right now superhero films are pretty much it. That's the one. Star Wars, obviously, Frozen certainly has an audience. So, but those things, that's they have a serious line of credibility. They're always going to sell, in at least as far as other than the solo standalone film.
Right.
Those movies have always performed well, and audiences have always had a good time at those films. And I think you could say that about the high quality kids films as well, whether it's Frozen or Tangled. You could go back to the second wave of great Disney films, Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid. Of course, those films work well with a great audience. I just don't know. It's rare anymore that you get something like Titanic, and I mean, Avatar is the odd, weird cousin to Titanic because it isn't as effective. You don't leave there feeling.
Well, it made such big money, and then no one remembered it 2 years later.
Or really has fond memories of it.
Yeah.
Even if they do remember, like, oh, I went to that movie and it was Dances with Wolves, which is
With
a better
blue
film.
people, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm specifically asking your personal experience with seeing audiences firsthand, because I mean, I think a lot of people will tend to like bring in box office numbers or Twitter reactions, which seem to be kind of false indicators in a lot of to a certain extent.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm guilty of that as well. I'm interested in box office numbers. I'm interested in critical opinions.
Even though you're firsthand with how much a specific theater is actually making and
Yeah.
what that means for a movie actually staying in an extra week in town.
Sure, but I never really wanted it to be as cutthroat as that. I never want to. If someone says, what is a good film that's playing right now, I will never say, oh, this is something that is really popular, or this is something that's selling a lot of tickets, unless I think specifically that's what that person wants to know. I will say what I think is good.
Is there someone that wants to know that?
Honestly, lots of people, that don't come to the movies often, or that they only come 4 or 5 times a year, they want to see something that's popular because that's an opportunity for them to enjoy something that they can, or even just see something that they can have a conversation about, whether at their work or with their grandmother. Hey, we went and saw Ford versus Ferrari, and I think that's one of those films that works with a lot of different audiences, and that you can talk to your uncle about that at Thanksgiving.
So, all right, you were at South in the early '90s, and then you went back to North. That's when we met. And then you went to East.
Was I?
You were back and forth in a bunch of different places at the time.
Sure. What year did you
I was
start?
in '98, in January '98.
Yeah, and I don't think I was there long the second time. I've been at the East location for, I don't know, 10, 12 some odd years. A long time.
Well, you know, I remember because I followed you out for East, and then I was only there for like about a year and a half, but we overlapped for that point. So,
Where did you go from there?
well, that's when I left town and then came back. And when I came back, I went to North for the remainder until I finally moved to Texas for a while. But
When you left the first time, where did you go?
Louisville.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I lived in Louisville for about 6 months.
Who? Oh yeah, I do remember that.
Now you remember that.
Yeah.
No, you remember
Vaguely.
that.
Well, I didn't. I don't think. You didn't live there long enough that I went over there.
It's a
But I
blip,
also
but-
didn't go to Texas either, even though I really wanted to.
Yeah.
We planned on me coming down for Southwest 3 or 4 different years in a row, I think, or at least it
Really?
seemed like that.
I
We
don't
talked
remember
about
this.
it. I know at least twice where I was seriously looking at. It's like, well, I could drive or I could get a cheap plane flight. So I mean, obviously that's, and I don't know if it has the cachet that it did at the time. Obviously, when's the last time you've been?
South by?
Yeah.
I didn't pay last year, but I went. I was working last year, and I had to work through it. But year before that,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. I just
I haven't been.
seems
I
like
haven't
an
been.
experience.
I have not been to South by Music in years. I've only been doing South by Film for the last few years.
Well,
But
still, it's kind of like a Mardi Gras where people enjoy that.
Mardi Gras is actually a good description, just because I remember my first time, one of my first year's experience. I think I told, maybe it's you, but I told a bunch of people that it's like fall festival with hipsters.
That sounds awful.
It's no, it's just because how crowded the street is.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
Which, I mean, it has that kind of Beale Street or in Memphis or Mardi Gras, so you've been at Showplace or East since probably 2001. You think
It tends to run together, but I'd say probably that long. Sure.
Okay, I guess. One of the notable things, speaking of going to Austin back here, I wonder if you can confirm. Well, actually, I guess you can't confirm it, but I miss most about Austin right now is how enthusiastic theater crowds are going. Like, one of the things I've noticed coming back here, every movie theater, I have to tell someone to shut up or get off their phone. Every movie, without fail.
That's interesting. That's not my experience, and obviously I see because my children, I see a lot of kids shows. I don't really have bad experiences that often. I don't have a situation where somebody brought a kid that screams or yells or runs up and down or throws candy at me. It really doesn't happen. And you're seeing films, not just mainstream films, obviously, although I think certainly you do see plenty of those.
Right.
But that you kind of have an independent, slant. You're going to see.
Well, no. I mean, the one specifically that weirded me out was It Chapter 2, where it was like it was a crowded theater. It's a great way to see it. But I had to remind myself that back in Austin, you wanted to see things on Friday and Saturday night when the theater's crowded. You wanted people around just because you wanted the communal feeling. And now it feels like I'm wanting to avoid it.
I wonder if, and honestly, I can't speak to that with any level of clarity, whether or not that has to do with the market. Evansville is a smaller market, and so it's almost going to be exclusively mainstream films unless you really seek them out. So
Well, it's not the
audiences can talk. They because it's most of these films, Shane, and even though It Chapter 2 isn't the best example, a lot of these films they don't require your full attention. You can go to the bathroom, you can get a refill, you can check your text, and you can really just keep the thread.
That's a fair point, I guess.
So a lot of these people don't feel as if they need to give it their full attention. Even Marvel films, honestly, I mean, you could miss any 5-section chunk of any of those films, still keep up with
You
it.
don't have to treat it like cinematic church.
No, and that's the way I prefer to watch a film. But
Yeah.
honestly, I had good experiences for both It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. But I don't know if there's a ton of subtext there that required my full attention. If someone was texting next to me, I don't know if it would bother me that much, or if I would try and read their text.
Well, one thing I do
Do
want
you
to
do that?
I think if I did be a point of being like, dude, you're texting in a theater. I'm making a point of why.
Yeah.
I've told you that story about when I saw, and it's not that Austin was perfect because it was always like I almost exclusively saw stuff at the draft house, and whenever I had to go outside the draft house, someone would be on their phone. Like I've told you that story when big character dies in Last Jedi. There was a dude that was on his texting right next to me, and but one thing I want to ask you about that's very unique about how you watch movies is unless you tech a movie or QC a movie, you maybe we should explain exactly the process of how digital movies come in. They come in a hard drive.
Well, they just come in satellite.
Oh, they beam them in. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they beam into a central server that you have, and then you put them into hard drives at each individual theater that you want to show it to.
No, it's just a file transfers. It's Cat5 wire. So I've got 20 screens. I've got one central library, and it comes in from satellite. It's just a digital file. You put the trailer playlist on it, all the cues and everything. You send it out to each individual screen. So.
How many movies can fit on an individual screen?
They're terabyte hard drives, and usually it has a 3 or 4, depending upon the type of server and the company that made it. So I've got some screens that I can put probably 10 or 12 films on. Some of the smaller houses only hold 2 or 3, especially now that the files are enormous. When we first started using digital film, that's not right.
The oxymoron.
Yeah. So since it went to digital, most of the files, full feature files, a 2-hour feature in original 2K resolution were, 150 gigs. They were small. And now, some of these features, I'm sure when Irishman comes in, that'll be 350, 400 gigs. So, it just takes up a lot of space. And once 4K is the industry standard, that number will probably just keep going up.
So when you get the files, you can put the files on the projector, and you can, in theory, watch them as long as you have the keys available. That activates, that allows you, and the keys. There's a time, there's a clock on the server, and it allows you to watch within the certain window that the keys open in. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So it's an encrypted file that you open with a key, just a digital key, and usually they'll expire within a week or 2 of the ending of your booking. So if you hold over a booking, like a film plays longer than the studio originally expected it should, you get a holdover key, and those a lot of times will last longer. But I think your question is, or what you're trying to get to is, the way that I watch films piecemeal.
Yes, you have a non-linear way of watching movies. So movies will come in Tuesday or Wednesday before Friday showing, right? They'll be beamed in, and then the keys start up usually like Wednesday night, because studios now show movies Thursday night is pretty much the soft opening. They say it's open on Friday, but it'll open the Thursday before for the night showings. And if you don't QC the movie, which you are pretty busy and you're there late at night usually, you have to watch the movie in pieces, like I don't know, like a 50s audience goer who just like comes in halfway through a movie or something.
Yeah, well, I that works very well, honestly, with most films, and that's an indictment of mainstream cinema, honestly, because it shouldn't work. Part of the beauty of seeing a great film and your enjoyment of it is that you're, and clearly this is partially to do with, or at least similar to the idea of the concept of your podcast. You're experiencing light flickering on a wall. I need to be enveloped in that. I need to be in the idea that I'm seeing these things unfold, rather than just speakers and a projector and light flickering on a wall. Whereas if when you watch something out of sequence, so what I'll do is I'll watch 15 minutes at a time, usually, sometimes a little longer, sometimes more. But
that was my next question.
I'll try and watch it by scenes, so when I see a cut or a part that I feel like, well, I can walk away from this and pick this back up because I know where this edit is. And then I'll come back and watch that next sequence when I get an opportunity. So sometimes I'll watch a film, for instance, like Hobbs and Shaw, which I did not enjoy. I like the
I
cast.
actually had a good time with Hobbs and
Well,
Shaw.
the cast is great. I mean,
It's just
should
Jason
be
Statham
more
and
fun.
Rock bickering, but yeah.
It should be more fun than it is. It's just fucking dumb. It's fucking dumb. And then the
But hey,
any sequence
family.
well, fair enough. My kids did not see that movie, nor do they want to see that movie. And I think
No. I'm saying your family. I'm saying Fast and the Furious. Family, man. It's all about family.
Oh, see, yeah.
They're like,
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm not shitting on those movies. I think that they're entertaining to a certain extent, and I've said it to a certain extent a lot. You should cut out several of those.
I think.
Anyway.
That was the first time I heard it, so.
Oh, I think anytime you're having conversations.
You're like an actor. It's like, how do I hold my hands right now?
I missed my mark. Where, that's funny. No, you
Hobbs and Shaw, you were saying that
sure.
it's not a good movie, but it's
every sequence where the actors are interacting with each other, whether it's the Kevin Hart or Ryan Reynolds cameos, and then of course the two leads, they're great. They're just fun. They're having a good time. They're enjoyable actors, and I think Dwayne Johnson doesn't get the credit he deserves because he's a much better actor.
Hey, if money's credit, he gets the credit.
Well, sure. But when you consider how poor an actor somebody like Jean-Claude Van Damme or Schwarzenegger or even Stallone maybe is not, that's not fair because I think he's actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
Can be.
It's a good distinction.
Most action film heroes are terrible actors, or at least from my generation. And he's actually pretty good. He's nuanced. He's solid. I mean, he's in Moana. He can fucking sing a little bit. But all the action sequences were so fucking dumb. Like, it was difficult to watch those sequences because I would want to get back in. So I'd watch sequence and I'd want to get back into it because
but you'd
it
walk
was fun.
out.
But then you get to that edit, and then when you pick it back up again, it was one of these big action sequences that were so blatantly ridiculous that I just felt like I didn't want to, like I almost wanted to skip those parts. Like if my version of that movie would be condensed and it would be about 45 minutes long and it would be a fucking blank.
Well, let me ask you.
And it wouldn't have any action whatsoever.
It would just be The Rock bickering with Jason Statham and Kevin Hart just pops up.
And Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. Have you finished? Have you seen a sequence all Jojo Rabbit yet?
Oh yeah.
So how do you react to? I don't want to go too deep into spoilers.
I did watch it out of sequence, by the way. I didn't watch it in a linear.
I know specifically for me, there was a moment about 2/3 of the way through, which traditionally you're in the second act thing or something. But there's one specific moment. How would that moment have appeal, or how would you have seen that moment? Would you have jumped in, saw it, and it's like, oh, this happens, and then recontextualize everything you saw before then?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have something like that, and it doesn't always work. And there have been a lot of movies where I felt like, oh, I missed something by not watching that in the traditional way. But when there's a surprise or something that's interesting or changes your mind about something that's already happened in the film, and you also got to remember, I might not actually see the opening sequence until I've seen the entire rest of the movie. So yeah, I do. I think it's it's like the way was Bukowski who would just chop up sections and then throw it in a hat, and that's how it would.
No, Burroughs.
Burroughs,
Burroughs.
right.
Burroughs.
So that's kind of how I'm doing with the film, and so I'm reassembling it. Every new sequence I see.
Was there any specific movie that you thought kind of, if not improved, or at least made a unique way of watching that movie?
Well, the one that I thought was extraordinarily effective, because I watched Inside Llewyn Davis front to back, just like you would traditionally.
Uh-huh.
Did
you watch it first?
Yeah, that's, I think actually I saw that as a QC. I premiered it, so I watched it before it played for a general audience. So I watched the movie, and of course I'm, as with everyone who's sincerely enjoys cinema, I'm a big fan. I think they make a lot of great films. And in fact, I've loved all of them. I've loved all their movies. So I didn't really like it. Either that or I didn't get it. So I just felt like the Oscar Isaac character. He's an asshole. I just didn't enjoy the film. Not in a bad way. It just, when I say I didn't enjoy it, I didn't enjoy it the way I expected, because
Okay.
at that point, you expect something extraordinary. Especially since, some of their highlights, obviously, No Country for Old Men, Oh Brother, they're extraordinarily entertaining, and they have everything you expect from great cinema. And Inside Llewyn Davis actually has those things, but it required me to go back and watch some of these sequences, five, six, seven. I just burped. That picked that up.
You'll probably pick it up.
Awesome, I burped. 5, 6, 7 times, where it would, maybe the fourth or the fifth time it would finally click. And so when I finally got an opportunity, years later, I got the Blu-ray and then I watched it again. I realized, the movie was great the first time. It was me that didn't get it, and it almost took me watching those, because,
Well, what's the difference between watching it out of order and just repeat viewings?
um, I couldn't say specifically because, most of the time I'm only doing it out of order. When I do watch a movie and repeat viewings, a lot of times it's at home, which sometimes is, even though it isn't out of sequence, it's very disjointed because I'll pause it. Like, I've started Dolomite 4 times now.
The
Eddie
Netflix
Murphy
movie.
thing.
Dolomite
It's
Movie.
great, but I'm at home. So, I was like, well, I'm going to get up and pee. And then the next thing you know, I'm checking my email, bidding on something on eBay, reading a magazine. I was like, oh shit, I'm halfway through this movie again. So I'm very easily distracted when I
Anymore,
watch a movie at home.
there's a certain aspect to theater going where I go right now to specific movies, specifically Netflix ones that you can see at home, just because I don't have the pause option on it. Like if I pause, I lose the momentum of the movie. Like,
Sure.
yeah, which is why I'm interested, excited about we're going to go through the 3.5 hours of The Irishman coming up here soon.
Yeah, I'm excited. That should be one that I feel like I'm going to watch originally in sequence. I want to, watch the whole film. Wolf of Wall Street, I think, just comparing apples to apples, Wolf of Wall Street worked like that for me, where I watched the movie and I actually loved that the first time through.
It's a pretty entertaining, engaging movie for the first time through.
Absolutely. But then, you would watch some sections again, and it's not only is it entertaining, but it's really hilarious. And some of the things you notice the first time through about, the acting choices really stand out as like, why are they doing that specifically? The Jonah Hill character, when you watch that thing and you just kind of focus on sections that he's in and choices that he's making, sometimes it was exceptionally entertaining to watch those things 2 and 3 times through, and I would laugh at something the third time through that I didn't necessarily think was funny the first time through.
Interesting. So, I guess where do you see any trends in audience view, just how they take in movies going, or is it just same old? Every generation's the same. There's a George Lucas thing where he says that the ratio of good movies to bad movies actually has never really significantly changed since the 30s.
I think that's probably fair. There was a while, and I actually wonder now, even though you have different markets, where that number, although has gone up, the averages are probably the same. Great films, good films, poor films, complete garbage films. You could probably split those right down in quarters.
Well, with digital, based on us being Evansville being a small market, do you still see we get a lot more independent releases than we would have gotten just because of the cost of it, make a print and ship
Not really. It's still Evansville, and I mean you have to consider that exhibition is a business, so it doesn't do anyone any good to have a screen that you're showing a movie on that literally no one's coming to. So
Sure.
if you sell 0 tickets, it doesn't really matter. If you bring in something like Parasite or Lighthouse right now that might have a marginal audience.
Parasite, we've had this conversation. Parasite wouldn't have a marginal audience. That would have maybe potentially significant one.
You'd think that, and you know, I think our mutual friend Ted always makes
The ghost of Ted, who's not at this table.
He is the specter of Ted, but he will often say, you know, we've conditioned Evansville audiences to not come out to these films. I don't know if that's true. I actually disagree. I think that Evansville audiences don't come out to the films, and that's why they don't play, because the exhibitor doesn't give a shit about anything other than the fact, you know, if you make a film called Fire and customers come out and buy tickets for that, or you make a film called Ice and customers come out and buy tickets for that, you don't really care what the content either of those is, and one could be completely opposed to your. So, like, if we're a family establishment, if this is a hard R-rated film that's nothing but filth and drug use, like Trainspotting, which I love, you want to show that because audiences are paying to see that. Or if you're playing a faith-based film, you know, audiences are paying to see that. You don't really want to have, you know, a political opinion about any of this. So,
famously, I remember Showplace avoided Fahrenheit 9/11 when it came out, and the first week. But then after it was number one at the box office, they got it the second weekend.
It sold a lot of tickets, so it was doing well nationally, and so they decided to bring it in. It's a business, and if the Evansville market would make it viable, you know, if people would come out for these films, they would show the films. You know, it's just that they just don't. They don't support anything.
And they're basing this off the platform strategy for other markets too, and whatnot, and what the per theater gross is giving, and stuff like that.
There's a lot of factors, but you know, if something does well in Louisville, something does well in Indianapolis, there's a decent chance that it will translate to Evansville, only because something like word of mouth will be positive as well. So it's like, oh well, my aunt saw Parasite in Louisville, so and she said, hey, that movie's fucked up, I really enjoyed it. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know.
I was gonna say your aunt would tell you it's fucked up.
No, I'm not. This is an example. She might, I don't know. It seems unlikely. Seems unlikely she would see Parasite, or that your aunt would see Parasite.
My aunt will not see Parasite.
That's what I'm saying. But let's just say word of mouth is positive. Okay, not necessarily your aunt, but your friend, the guy you went to high school with. He lives I have a friend that lives in Denver, and so obviously he could, any night of the week, he could see an amazing show, he could see an art installation, he could see a film that's not playing in a smaller market. You know, when he has a lot of entertainment choices that we don't. So he tells me, hey, I went to go see Parasite. That movie was fucked up. I think you'd really enjoy it. That's the type of movie that eventually will play well in Evansville. It does require some trickle. Oh, I hate that. It does require some publicity that isn't generated from marketing.
The actual word of mouth.
Studios won't pay for it. They can't afford it. You know, if a movie costs $12 million to make, they can't spend $50 million of Disney marketing money to make that a hit, to make that a success. So it requires the film to be good and to turn on an audience for that to work in a smaller market.
So going back to what we were talking about with Titanic, do you have any other what audience reaction moments or movies have gotten big audience over the years at Showplace East?
Interesting. You know, I was thinking about this, not necessarily just because I know we were going to have a conversation, and it certainly was probably going to center around movies, because my son is going through this period where he's afraid of ghosts. And I don't think it's from movies he's seen, because he doesn't watch, you know, scary films.
But I thought you were showing him The Purge.
No.
Okay.
But, you know, the movies that, and these aren't necessarily great films, but Blair Witch Project and the first Paranormal Activity and The Ring, those movies were always great to experience with an audience, because it was the first time, and for whatever reason, those films did something differently than previous films, particularly Paranormal Activity. I loved being in that, because it was, I had it timed down to the second. I needed to be in there 4 minutes and 38 seconds before the movie was over, because that's that moment at the end on the well, you've seen the film, and
I
because
don't remember if I've seen the first one. I was still working in a theater when it came out, but I don't remember if I saw it.
there's 5 with diminished returns. I mean, once you've done that, it doesn't work again. So the second paranormal and the third and the fourth and the fifth is basically just variations on a theme, and you've already heard the joke. It's not going to work for you again. But that was so effective initially.
I guess I wanted to kind of my final big question is a broad open question.
What's the time you've laughed the hardest?
No, it's although what sure why
No,
not?
that's that Pete Holmes thing.
I don't know what the Pete Holmes thing
You don't
is.
listen to the Pete Holmes podcast?
I have. I don't remember. I do actually remember that in there.
Those
No.
are always great stories because, and in fact, you should kind of consider the format of your podcast, because if you're going to say, I'm going to have friends and acquaintances over and we're going to talk about film because, as a
Are you asking me if I thought this through?
well, yes, no, and I'm not.
Are you not having a good time?
I'm offering insight. No, and in fact, that's why when I said, and I mean, I still think we should do this. It should just be a whole network, so you can have your shingle. Shane talks movies, and occasionally has, whatever, however you want to.
Nothing's set in stone yet. It
Well,
could be.
of course it isn't. That's the beauty of the format. But you should have some sort of angle. So if you're going to if you need to define this or contain it in a cinematic universe.
Is it cinema? If it's a cinematic universe, is it really cinema?
I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that.
My final question was it was a broad open and it would tell me the mess up movie theater stories. Just like I remember one of my big ones was when I was working concession once, and this mom was ignoring this little girl who just kept tugging at her dress, and the mom was just powering through to ignoring it until finally a puddle appeared underneath the little girl, and I had to clean up the urine.
No.
But I mean, stuff like that. Or the time we were showing we were doubled up in Theater 9 in North. They had Waterboy and Rugrats, and we found a 40 after Waterboy, but Rugrats was over the thing, so we assumed someone had brought a 40 to Rugrats.
Oh sure, that happens all the time. Honestly, we now that we have a bar, I have people come in sometimes. This is not my experience because I usually don't work in the daytime any longer, but we have customers that come in at like 11, like, hey, can I get something to drink? And of course, we don't have a bartender at the time, so people want to come in, watch the early show of, say for instance, right now it might be Playing with Fire, that John Cena family film. And they're like, well, I really need 2 beers to sit through this with my children. So that's something that wouldn't surprise me. Somebody could bring their kids to see Rugrats and say, to sit through this movie, I'm going to require this pint of hot damn or whatever.
Sure, and I mean, there's been a few movies I've seen lately where I've had to.
Well, for you don't have to. It accentuates it.
No, there was. I don't want to crap on the movie, but I knew one movie that I was like, I'm not gonna have a good time here. I just going this just because the possibility is a good one, and I had a drink, and it was a nice way of getting through the movie. And
Well, having a drink, especially for a comedy, I think is useful. Don't you?
sure, yeah, I mean, yeah, having beer with that's definitely one of those things I miss about the Alamo, but
You can have a beer almost any movie theater now.
yeah.
Standard.
How long ago was that change? Did it
About 2 years ago, I think.
really?
Yeah.
Because I mean, AMC did it around the same time or a year before then.
I mean, at some point, who cares? Honestly.
No, it's just
people are going to sneak in alcohol anyway, so why not just
No,
sanction it?
it's good. I mean, the whole thing was just
And
liquor licenses and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
but we are in Indiana. I don't know how it works in normal states, but in Indiana there was a lot of pushback against that because obviously I think Indiana was the last or nearly last state to allow Sunday alcohol sales. For whatever reason,
I kind of forgot that we actually have Sunday alcohol sales here.
Oh yeah, and it affected no one. And to be honest, I've never bought alcohol on a Sunday. It never really occurs to me like
I see that.
I'm gonna have to stock up for football because today's Saturday, and so no one ever really did that. I think it's a false narrative, and I know from experience from working at the cinema. Originally, people were like, I don't want a drunk guy in there watching this movie with my kids. It's like, you're drunk already.
That was
lady.
seriously what was said?
You had 3 glasses of wine.
That was really something.
Yes. Initially, when it was announced we were going to have a bar in the theater and you could take alcohol from the bar into any of the cinemas, that some people said, well, I'm not coming back. I'm not bringing my children. But I've never, not one time, had to kick someone out of a movie theater that was being loud and obnoxious because they were drunk.
Never?
Yes, of course, but not that we sold alcohol to them.
No. I was specifically asking because they were drinking.
People from our bar, like people that sit in the bar and get obnoxious. I've had to kick several people out of the bar, but most of the time, what happens is, most normal people, they'll get 2 beers, double fist them into the cinema, and just watch the movie. They're not there to get drunk, and plus it's expensive.
Yeah.
Get drunk at our place, you'd have to spend $40-$50. So not everyone can, on top of the popcorn and the candy and just the admission, not everybody has that kind of money. So a couple drinks is really all most people can afford.
Well, let's narrow it down.
But we do that for a reason too. You don't want to have $2 beer night at the cinema, because then it will just be brawls in all of these. It chapter 2, instead of a guy texting, it'd be you and him fighting.
No, I probably, even still a few beers, I'd still be like just silently resenting him. I guess to narrow it down, what's your best kicking someone out stories?
Oh, well, the one I'm most embarrassed by, I kicked out these 2 people that were drunk and obnoxious, and they started talking and insulting me on the way out, and so I kind of fell into that pattern. I talked back, and I said a few rude things, and then later I thought, I've stooped to that level. They were drunk, and I was sober, and I let them upset me.
You don't want to repeat what was said.
Oh, it was awful. But then I found out later that one of those 2 people, he was developmentally challenged, and so, I really went out of my way to say something rude to somebody that maybe was probably didn't drink that often and maybe didn't know how to handle it, and then said something to me, not knowing me, just because they hadn't taken their alcohol correctly, and so it hit them differently, and so I felt like it was embarrassing for me. But one of my favorite cinema stories, and of course I have tons of stories about cleaning up something disgusting, or finding a short case of beer and a full pizza. Everybody has those stories. Soiled diaper.
Soiled diaper, I think I've
adult
heard.
diaper. Not just
I've never seen
no,
an
mostly,
adult diaper.
The thing is with kids or with parents, when they change a diaper and leave it in the cinema, they'll fold it up nicely. So it's just a little pill, a little package. And you're like, oh, a diaper. You pick it up and you throw it away.
You don't use the dustpan?
Nah, I'm a father. I changed so many diapers. Your perspective on that changes at some point where it doesn't affect you at all. Wiping somebody else's ass, something I think I don't know what you're into, if that's your thing, but for me it's like, I did that so many times now, it's not even really, it's not second nature necessarily, but it's not something that I think is like, oh, that's disgusting.
But the adult diaper, they're not as
they just
polite
shit
about it
themselves and just leave it. Like they don't fold it over, so there'll be fucking flies. It's disgusting. Adults are disgusting. Some of them, this has happened several times. You go in the men's room. You're just like, hey, there's a problem in here. Something doesn't smell right. And someone will have shit themselves and just left their clothing, like underwear, shorts, the whole thing, in the men's room.
Like they went out with a trench coat?
I have no idea how they left the
They
building.
just like Winnie pooed on the way out?
This is the summertime. They were obviously wearing shorts. Did they run out naked? I don't know. This has happened more than once. And I don't know also what they're eating that caused them, they couldn't sit through a 2-hour movie without shitting themselves. I don't know. But that's happened a lot. But this is honestly my favorite story, and it has nothing to do with seeing a movie or anything like that. I had been working at the cinema for a long time. It was probably, I was in college, so I was in my early 20s, 2021. And I was working projectors, which, as you know, is the best job
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Because you start the movie, you make sure the presentation's good, and then you can do whatever you want. You can watch the movie if you want, but what I did, I read a lot. And I think
read
you
a
did
lot
too.
yeah.
I read more books in the 4 or 5 years that I was projectionist than I have in my entire life. I loved being a projectionist.
The point in my life where I was able to read a book a day was when I was a projectionist.
Such a beautiful time.
Yeah.
The best job. Obviously, you didn't earn a lot of money, but it didn't really matter. I almost felt like we should be paying them. It was a great time. I like movies, obviously. That's obviously a factor. But I really enjoyed that. But so I'm upstairs. It's a Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon, so that's contextually important. All the movies have started. I'm sitting just reading a book in the projection booth. And of course, at the time, the stock for the concession stand was upstairs.
Is this at South?
No, it was at East. The stock for the concession stand is upstairs, and so the concession kids have to come up there to get the cups and the bags and the whatever else they have to get. So I'm sitting there, and a couple of girls come up. I didn't know them. I knew most of the employees, but because I was a projectionist, I didn't really have to know them.
Right, I remember
You know,
that.
as long as I show up and do my own work, no one really cares what you did. You know.
This would have been pre-uniform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. David Walsh, and I'm name checking David Walsh, but he was the reason that we got uniforms because he would wear that same dirty white T-shirt with cigarette burns on it for weeks at a time, and they were like, this is not going to work.
I remember there was a period I got blamed for it too.
It may have been you.
No,
I
it
don't
wasn't
know.
me. It was not me.
It might have, David, I'm sorry for outing you, but I think he was the reason they eventually, but I actually just, I'd wear a rock and roll T-shirt and some shorts. That's just, standard projectionist attire.
Right.
So a couple of girls come up, they're giggling, blah, blah, blah. I was probably 20, and of course concession girls 16, 17, 18. So they go downstairs with their stock. About 5 minutes later, one of the girls comes back up. I didn't know her name, didn't know who she was, and I'm just sitting in a chair reading, and she was actually very pretty. Came over and just kissed me on the mouth, just like a cinematic moment happening at the theater. And she smelled like cinnamon whiskey or something, Sunday afternoon. And I never saw or spoke to her ever again. I think that was her training shift. She never came back. And to me, it was a beautiful moment because
Do you think she had a shot of whiskey to do it?
Oh, she was drunk. She was drunk. And it was Sunday afternoon. So, but that with children, because basically, children work at the cinema.
Yeah.
You give people a chance, and some people are fit for the job, and some people aren't. And obviously, she was just the type of girl that didn't want a job. Probably her mom made her get a job. And so she either stayed up late on Saturday drinking or showed up early on Sunday and had a few drinks before work, but really made a
pretty
really
strong
nice
impression on you.
A memory that I will never forget. It was and the fact that I don't even know who that was, and I know for a fact that they didn't put her on the schedule anymore because she showed up to work drunk. I don't know who that was. It was almost too cinematic for words. I mean, it was really an impressionable moment, and I that was one of my best days at work.
I can't think of a better note to go out on. Aaron Smith, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.